everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Marette Newman, and on behalf of the Commonwealth of Learning and specifically the Open Door Initiative, I welcome you all to this, our second webinar in the series on the future of learning and thought leadership. It is indeed heartening this morning to see so many of you from across the Commonwealth with us for this live session. And we especially welcome members of the International Partnership of Distance and Online Learning for COVID. Today, we are excited to have with us a researcher, award-winning professor, educational technology pioneer, a man known for high-impact ideas that create ripples of change and an inspiration to many, Professor Sugata Mitra. Some of you will associate his name with the hole in the wall experiment. You may know him as the man who over 20 years ago embedded computers in the walls of Delhi slums to examine how children interact with technology. And he showed the world that children can learn without adult guidance. Or perhaps you associate his name with the School in the Cloud project, where he again demonstrated that when led by big, open-ended questions and generous encouragement, children can learn independently just as much as their peers in traditional classrooms. Today, he will share with us his thoughts on the emerging future of learning. In his presentation, he will draw on the results of his experiments to explain how the internet influences children and learning and how these influences change over time. He will challenge our ideas about schools and learning and knowledge, and he will suggest to us what the future of education might look like and the steps we should take to prepare ourselves for the changes that will come. Ladies and gentlemen, this promises to be a thought-provoking and informative session. So again, welcome and do enjoy. Before we ask Professor Mitra to share with us, the President of COL, Professor Asha Kanwar, would like to make some brief remarks. Professor Kanwar.
Thank you, Merit. All our audience, that we can see as postage stamps on the screen, as well as the invisible audience around the Commonwealth. A very warm welcome to you all. And we are in for a very exciting session because Professor Mitra, as we know, is an original thinker, a very provocative thinker, and he's really made a lot of difference to education globally. So we are talking about the emerging futures of education, or should we say, has the future of education actually already emerged? Because as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has created the worst disruption in education globally. Very thoughtful and positive-minded people are thinking of how this crisis can be converted into an opportunity to build back better. And we know that even during the pre-pandemic days, the global community was concerned about the learning crisis, how children were in school but did not learn basic literacy or numeracy. Even those in universities were not learning the skills required for the world of work. In this post-pandemic period, many children, and especially girls, are in great danger of dropping out of the school system altogether. Youth unemployment is already very high in the Commonwealth, much higher than the global average, and is likely to get much worse. So how can we reshape the future of education to ensure that it addresses contemporary concerns and makes us more resilient to deal with future disasters? If at all there's a silver lining in this crisis, it's the shift in mindsets that we have seen over the last few months. Let's just look at three. The first, of course, is the shift from teaching in the classroom to distance learning. Now, years of advocacy could not have caused the world to adopt distance learning, as it was obliged to do almost overnight. So how can we build on this foundation to make this a lasting benefit by shifting the emphasis from teaching to learning, and learner-centric learning that is both enjoyable and meaningful. I mean, we somehow feel that it has to be onerous, otherwise we are not learning. So how can we make it into something more enjoyable? The second shift has been the massive use of technology. Technology has to be part of the process of teaching and learning in the future. And many countries will find innovative approaches to make technology a valuable tool for learning. The world community must work together to ensure that even the last mile is covered with appropriate and affordable learning technologies, because we don't want to widen the digital divide. And the third shift is that since the classroom is not the single locus of learning, learning can take place in any context, which means whether it's non-formal, informal. And if you look at it, formal education only accounts for a small fraction of the time we spend in learning. In 16 waking hours during grades 1 to 12, we spend about 18% time in formal learning environments. And this, of course, keeps decreasing as we transition to undergraduate and graduate study. The rest of our waking lives are spent in informal learning environments. So how can we recast the future of education as a continuum of lifelong learning? I mean, that's something which is a priority for Paul, lifelong learning, etc. So with those few words, let me again invite Professor Sugata Mitra, whom we admire greatly and who has been a friend of Paul. And we've learned a lot from him over the years, to enlighten us further. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to visit Paul, although this time I could not actually, come across. But this is the way we travel nowadays, I guess. Anyhow, welcome to all the participants. Thank you for joining in, over 100 of you over there from many, many different countries. I feel very happy about that, because what I have to say, is the result of many years of work. It's just conclusions taken from many pieces of work that I have done. Unfortunately, the picture that it makes is not usually very applicable to the existing system. People kind of hesitate to say, well, shall we do that? Because it's so different. But I can't help that, because that's what I found. It's not what I thought of. It's what I found. So what I thought I would do in these few minutes that we have is to take you across these findings so that you can yourself make up your mind about whether the conclusions make sense or not. I have a PowerPoint to sort of help explain some of these points. So I will share my screen and talk along with the slides. Hopefully I'll pop back onto the screen every now and then if I can figure out how to do that. But otherwise you should see me like a little postage stamp at the corner of the screen somewhere. Okay, all right, now here we go. Let me see. Well, there we are. So the basic topic is the future of learning, and as Sanjay put it, it's actually the emergent future of learning, or a future which has kind of popped up at us. Okay, it's not as though we predicted it and then we expected it and then it came along. It just came in, and the virus helped into that. I say helped. It isn't as though it would not have happened if there was no pandemic. It would have happened anyway. Let's see where it came from. But the first of the experiments, which I did were back in 1999. And so it's almost, a little over 20 years of different kinds of experiments. Why did I do that? Well, it's actually quite interesting. I just did one experiment first, an experiment which everybody calls the hole in the wall. And I had no intentions of doing anything more after that. But the trouble is that that experiment raised a few questions which I couldn't answer. And so I did the next one. And then that raised a few more questions. And then the next, and the next, and then the next. And suddenly people said, but you're talking of a new education. And I said, well, that wasn't my intention. But you hear the story and you decide. So to start with, the first of the experiments. Well, what was the hole in the wall? Well, it was back in 1999. And you have to, those of you who can, have to throw your mind back 20 years. There was a time when children had never seen computers, okay, particularly poor children. There was a time when children and many adults had not even heard of the internet. I'm talking of that time. Back then, my question was, what would children do if they were confronted with the internet without any explanation? It's a bit like if you were to, sort of step out onto your balcony and find that there's a spaceship hanging outside. What would you do? I wanted to find that out. So I did this experiment back in 1999. You can see that picture there. There's the computer. It's stuck inside a wall, hence the name, the hole in the wall. There's a touchpad stuck next to it. It's just got windows on it. And children came and started to mess around. People thought they would break it. They didn't. People thought they would not understand because, the content was in English and these children barely know any English. People thought that after a while, they will want instruction. But that did not happen. What happened instead was that we found within hours, children beginning to work the computer. Within weeks, they were beginning to download things, games particularly, and to start playing them. Within months, they had learned how to search the internet in their broken English. And I thought, well, they seem to have learned the things that we all do on computers. They seem to have reached the level of an office secretary. So I measured this effect over a 9-month period and found that unsupervised groups of children given access to the internet will, in a period of 9 months, reach the same levels of computing literacy as the average office secretary anywhere. It was absurd. And people said, who is teaching them? To answer that question, I had to spend 20 more years. So what was the conclusion from the hole in the wall? Groups of heterogeneous children with unsupervised access to the internet in a safe public space, okay, a big screen in a safe public space, can learn to use the internet by themselves. Question, who is teaching them? I didn't know, but I knew that they could learn things by themselves. How many things? What kind of things could they learn? I took the work further. I brought it to England in 2006. In England, you can't actually do the hole in the wall experiment outdoors because, you can't do anything outdoors in England because of the weather. So I took it indoors. You can take the hole in the wall into a classroom. How would you do that? Very simple. Take a few computers, much fewer than the children. If there are 20 children, take 4 or 5 computers. Put them in a room, turn on the internet, and ask the children a question. Ask them something nice, something interesting. You ask them, for example, so what color are trees? So obviously children of this age that you see, oh, they're all green. Yeah, that's okay. But why are they green? Well, so I said, so you don't know actually. I mean, neither do I. I don't quite know why exactly are they green. Why not any other color? Why not, purple? Can you check this out on the internet? And then you just sit back. The hole in the wall started happening inside the classrooms of northeastern England. And the children found out. They would find out for the question that I just used as an example, they would find out about chlorophyll, about the conversion of sunlight, about the formation of sugars, of the other chemicals. I and my teacher friend Emma, we would just watch, amazed at what was going on. How could they put all this together? We couldn't figure out. I measured many times in many countries, and we got to this conclusion. Children who cluster around the internet, again in safe but unsupervised spaces. Remember, safe but unsupervised spaces. If they're excited about something, they can organize themselves to learn anything. Anything? Well, anything that I could think of. I have a paper trying to measure if there is a limit to how far these children can go. And I've shown in that I couldn't find the limit. You could give them anything. Does it mean that they will learn, quantum physics by themselves? But guess what? The answer is yes. In their own childlike way, they will. 9-year-olds in a school in Lucknow, a city called Lucknow in India. When I asked them, do you think you could learn quantum physics by yourself? And 9-year-olds always say yes to this sort of thing. They say, hey, yeah, no problem. So they went at it, And after about 40 or 50 minutes, I said, well, what have you found out? And they said, if you take a ball, a tennis ball, and throw it at the wall, it keeps bouncing back. If you go on doing it for millions and millions and trillions of times, then sometimes you will find that the ball has come on the other side of the wall. It's appeared on the other side of the wall, but there is no break in the wall. It just vanished from this side and popped up on the other. They said, things can be in 2 places at the same time. Quantum physics says that. And once again, the school principal and I, we just stood there saying, how is this possible? What's going on? We learned another thing about this whole process. I gave it a name at that time. I called this process, when you do it inside a classroom, I called it a self-organized learning environment. SOLE, S-O-L-E, self-organized learning environment. Children in a SOLE are unsupervised and they work with a question, as I told you, but they can do really much better if you encourage them. You don't supervise them, right? You don't say, why don't you look for this? Or, what about that? Put in, why are you using this software? Why don't you use something else? You don't say all that. But if you were to say, wow, you're doing really well. I can't imagine how you got there so quickly. I gave this process a name. I called it the method of the grandmother. Admiration as a form of encouragement. And I wrote an article in the Guardian newspaper in England saying that, if you like children and if you have an internet connection, can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? And I got hundreds and hundreds of people, many retired school teachers, but many young people, many old people, men, women. But they all got this name, the Granny Cloud. And they're still there today. What do? Well, in places where a good teacher is not present or cannot go or whatever, the Granny Cloud can beam in. And they can ask the children a question and they can admire as they search for the answer. That's all they do. So a combination of the self-organized learning environment and the Granny Cloud gives us a model of how children can learn by themselves. The presence of an admiring adult improves the quality of this process. So I decided to put the two things together, SOLE, souls, and the Granny Cloud, and to put it together into a facility called the School in the Cloud. It can exist out in the community, or it can exist inside a school. Actually, it works better inside a school, because a school has maintenance facilities and, they can keep the place clean, that sort of thing. Whereas in the community, that doesn't work that well. At least that's what I found. So the School in the Cloud combines self-organized learning with the Granny Cloud. If a teacher is present, you don't need the Granny Cloud. The teacher plays that role. She doesn't teach. Remember, I will say this again and again. She doesn't teach. She asks the question, she sits back, and she admires the answer. In about 4 years of experimentation, what we found is that schools in the cloud improve comprehension, communication, and computing in children. By computing, I don't mean the ability to write computer programs. No, not that kind of computing. I mean the ability of children to search the internet, to look for tools, and to solve problems using the internet. That's what I mean by computing. Comprehension, of course, you know what it is, and communication. So the 3 C's, comprehension, communication, and computing, instead of reading, writing, and arithmetic. At that point, the education community said, that's too much. So let's take a look at what the existing system is like. What happens in school? We take in children for about 12 years, and we try to teach them everything we know, everything. Why? Because just in case, if they ever need it. But we don't think of what the children think of all this. When you teach a child the 17 times tables, the child may want to know, what am I supposed to do with this? Why do I have to know this by heart? And if you say, well, it will help you to calculate your bus ticket, Today's children will say, but I have a smartphone, I mean, I can figure it out with the phone. But we never ask them. We continue to teach them everything we know, just in case they ever need it. Think back at your own schooling. Okay? Think back at everything that they taught you. And think to your life. Think of your life today. In this life, which I hope is happy, useful, how much of all those things that you learned do you use? They must have taught you Archimedes' principle. And how many times do you use it? You tell me. So what should we do then? But I think, first of all, we should change the curriculum, not the content of the curriculum. We should change the way we express the curriculum. Instead of saying, you should learn trigonometry, you should frame it as a question. You should understand how a mobile phone knows where it is. When you say my location, how does it figure out where it is? Can you measure the height of a mountain without climbing it? Both of these questions will lead to trigonometry, but you don't use the word. If we convert the curriculum into big questions, then children will have some idea of why you're telling them all this. I'll leave it at that, as we don't have all that much time. So remember, the curriculum of big questions. And what if the curriculum contained the things that we don't know yet? The questions to which we do not have an answer. Let me tell you this. Children love questions to which we don't have the answer. Try and leave them with that sort of question. And they will bump into everything that we already know in their attempt to find the unknown. Isn't that how we progress? Our ability or our desire to answer the big questions to which no one knows the answer. Maybe that's how we should frame the curriculum. How should we teach the curriculum? What should we do to, how do we actually ensure that children learn what the curriculum contains? Well, let me give you a one-line answer. Don't teach what the learner can learn by themselves. Don't teach what learners can learn by themselves. It's kind of obvious, isn't it? Why would you, if they can? So why hasn't that been used before? Because it wasn't easy earlier. You couldn't have said to a child, why are all plants green? Go and find out. It would have taken the child a week. They would have had to go to the library. They would have had to ask all sorts of people. It was just not practical. So you had to start from the answer. You had to say, I know the answer. I'm going to explain it to you. But we don't need to do that today. As those experiments have shown, using the internet and using the ability of children to self-organize, we can find the answer. The answer just appears, it pops up. If you ever tried a soul, you will see this happen in children. I give it a name from physics. I call it spontaneous order. When you have chaotic self-organization, you invariably end up with spontaneous order, if you've set it up right. So a pedagogy of the internet using self-organizing systems and spontaneous order, let's say we use that method. And what do we do with examinations? Well, you all know examinations, isn't it? I mean, I've put in this picture just to show you, because I'm sure that even now, even after all these years, when you look at it, a little funny feeling goes up and down your backbone. the invigilation, being alone, paper and pencil, a list of questions, no assistive devices. Why? Why? Because one day you will have to solve these problems and there will be no one to help you. But that was the reality of the 19th and the 20th century. It's not true anymore. Now, there is always someone to help you inside your pocket. We need a new examination system. We need an examination system which simply measures whether people can find accurate answers to questions. Can find, not know. Earlier, we used to say, we need an assessment system to find out if people know the answers to problems. Now I'm saying we need an assessment system to find out if people have the ability to find an accurate and current answer to a question or a problem. Well, I have to show you this slide too, because I've been saying this for the last 5 or 6 years now, completely unsuccessfully. We must allow the internet during examinations. Why? Because that's how we find answers. What's the objection? Oh, but that's cheating. So does that mean that you and I, who use Google all the time, I'm sure you use the internet all the time, Google Maps, Google Questions, Google this, Google that, are we all cheating all the time then? Does that make sense? So then, what have the children done wrong? When you give them their list of questions, why don't you give them their phone back so that they can answer them? And then you measure whether they have the ability to look for the answer, to find the answer accurately and correctly, to be able to discuss it with their friends, to check if it works, and then produce the answer, the correct answer. What do we want to measure? We want to measure the ability to figure things out. Why? Because the education system, as we have it now, is entirely about the past. Okay? Everything about the past. What did Archimedes do? What did Newton find? What did Darwin say? Everything in the past. Because it assumes that the future is predictable. If you know the past, you can extrapolate to the future. But then we live in a world where what we need to know is no longer evident. There is no time better than this one to say this. We are sitting in that time where you can't say what will happen day after tomorrow. So what is that huge information from the past that you have inside your head? How is it going to help? Schools will need to focus on the future as much as they do on the past. I'm not saying that you don't have to learn what Newton did and what Darwin said, but we also need to be able to focus on the future, to be able to predict it accurately and to be able to defend our prediction. So what do we measure? According to me, we just need to measure three things. Comprehension, the ability to understand. Communication, the ability to transfer your understanding to someone else. And computing, the ability to use the internet. So basically, can you use the internet to find an accurate answer? Can you understand the answer? And can you transfer this understanding to someone else so that you can together solve the problem? And can you do all of this just in time? Not just in case, but just in time. So I was thinking of how should I end what I had to say. I think I'll put it as this one line here: the ability to imagine a future will determine this age that is coming, this age that I can only describe as the end of knowing. Sounds terrible, and I'm sorry, but maybe the whole idea of a head full of knowledge has had its day, to be replaced by a much more agile brain that is in constant search for answers. So I'm going to leave you here and hope that all this made some sense. I have a book where all this is described in a reasonable amount of detail. And thanks a lot for listening.
So it's a pleasure to propose a vote of thanks to all of you, starting with Dr. Mitra, who gave us a very, very valuable presentation. You know, because of COVID-19 lockdown, the arrivals of people into the world of online learning and distance learning in general has been quite massive and quite unexpected, unprecedented, and systems are not quite prepared to handle that. And here is where a number of ideas that Dr. Mitra has generated for over 2 decades through his research in a variety of topics such as self-organized learning are going to be extremely useful. I learned long ago from social workers that we should never do experiments with people while they're under stress. And so instead of doing experimentation in many of these matters, we can make use of a number of ideas from Dr. Mitra's work and from this presentation to guide students and teachers through in this very stressful time. So thank you, Dr. Mitra, for sharing with us a number of your ideas from your very valuable research. And your thought processes are extremely valuable to all our constituents. I also want to
Thank
thank
you.
partners of the Open Door, which is a very, very important coalition for many of us because it's providing opportunities for us to interact with people such as Dr. Mitra earlier with Dr. Mark Prensky. And these thinkers are bringing cutting edge ideas, well founded research to people who need those results most. We want to thank them for staying with us all through these 6 months. I also want to thank people from almost 13 countries. A very large number of them from Commonwealth countries are present here. Thank you for joining us. Your time zones are very, very different. Some of you are probably about to retire for the day. We thank you once again for your keenness to interact with the speaker. The questions were really profound. I don't think they could have been taken up even in a 3-hour session because they are really very important questions that have come up. And while concluding, I also want to thank the team here in Vancouver, in the Commonwealth of Learning, Dr. Sanjay Mishra, who's convening this interaction, and his colleague, Na Ajli Saki, for their dedication in making sure that this session came through and was organized to perfection, to Dr. Myrat Newman for her initial remarks, and to Professor Asha Kanwar for her introductory speech. So with those few words, I want to thank everyone again for your participation and wish you very well in your endeavors. Thank you. Bye.